KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Ivan Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother, Dagan Tully Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I collect spores, mold, and fungus.
Yes.
I really do, actually.
Egon, my favorite character in the movie, I think. We'll have to talk about that, but we won't get to that yet.
Not yet.
That's too quick.
Don't rush it.
Don't rush it. Well, welcome all to KnockBack, our weekly retro and nostalgia podcast we do right here on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia, where you can get early ad-free access to every episode of this show, the ability to submit questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas to our nostalgia programming, as well as being able to pick, choose, vote on other topic ideas. So welcome. Thank you for all of that. Dagan, as we always like to begin our show with just getting a little warmed up, vamp a little bit, as they say in the industry.
Break.
How's your life
ice.
going? How's everything going with you?
Good, man. You know what? I was thinking about, I think you were in the email chain. I think I told you. I haven't really talked to you since last week, but I got a new job.
Yeah, I saw that in the email. Congratulations. Yes.
Thank you very much. Very excited about that. But the reason I bring it up, and you know me a little bit, Kyle, like with the show, I don't know. I'm a little torn about bringing up too many personal life related things on the show. I honestly think the more I do it, the more our listeners do kind of find that stuff interesting and fascinating. I think they like us a little bit, right? They want to know what's going on in our lives.
Yeah,
this is not.
I think that's safe to say.
Sometimes you got to pull back the curtain, and that's okay. I just think it's more of a humility thing with me, but I wanted to speak to this for our listeners, a lot of you guys and girls out there, because you guys have been so good in reaching out to me, and I think maybe a little bit feeling bad for me with the job situation. And I wanted to clear the air about a couple of things too, because I think I've elicited a little too much sympathy from you guys. So to make a long story short with my career, most of you guys will know that I'm an animator professionally. I've been doing that for a long time. I work in TV animation mostly. And I spent the better part of the last decade at Sesame Workshop doing animation for Sesame Street. We kind of became... My little team became the core in-house animation team at Sesame, which is a really cool thing. But I decided in the springtime, I guess it was early in the spring of 2021, I was going to leave. I got an offer to direct a pilot for a different network, an animated show pilot for a different network, which is something that I always wanted to do. And I said I always would do it if it was a pilot of my own creation, a show of my own creation, or something that kind of spoke to me that I could see myself, heading up. And the show was not created by me, but it was something that I thought was really cute and really smart, and I loved the art direction. So I left a long-term position at Sesame for a 3-month gig. I think that's something that a lot of you guys didn't realize. Like, I didn't leave for a long-term position somewhere else. I left for a 3-month commitment. Now, sometimes when you do that in any job, but I could speak to animation, you kind of just think to yourself in an optimistic way, okay, this is going to be a 3-month gig initially, but I'm sure it'll lead to other things. If the series doesn't get picked up right away, or if there's some sort of period where we're waiting to hear, I'll just work on something else at the studio, blah, blah, blah. So I kind of had high hopes that it would become a long-term-ish thing, hopefully. But there was no commitment on either end that was going to be the case. So I left being at Sesame for years for a 3-month opportunity, and after 3 months, it ended. So I kind of asked for it, and I think that's what a lot of you guys didn't realize in my DMs and the messages you guys send by the dozens, just in reaching out in a concerned way, which I appreciate and love you guys so much for. But yeah, that was the thing. That was my kind of risk. That was my undertaking. And it didn't pan out into other things. We did the pilot. I think we'll know whether it's going to go to series sometime next year. There's no rush on the network's end, which is many times that's the case. They got a lot of fires in the. They got a lot of what do you say? Pokers
irons
in the fire.
Irons
In the fire.
Irons, yeah.
So there's no real rush. So we'll hear eventually. But in the meantime, I was able to go and work for another studio, which was kind of like my West Coast Sesame, like my West Coast family. They gave me 3 months of work. I got to animate on some stuff. So I've been waiting for a gig, for a promising gig, and I got one. I start next week. It's a children's network, a major children's network. I'll give you 3 guesses, and if you guess 3 times, you're gonna get it right.
It rhymes.
I'm really excited as a character designer. I'm really excited.
It rhymes with Blinkapodian.
That's fair. That's fair. Yes, it is.
Loran. That's an old joke in our family. We play this game called Celebrity, and it's just you just put names in a hat, band names, character names, whoever, and then you split into 2 teams, and one person on one team, takes the pieces of paper out and tries to describe who the person, the band, the character, whatever it is, and the other person guesses. So one of them was Duran Duran, and my dad was going, and he was like rhymes with, which is totally not allowed by the way in the game, but he was like rhymes with Loran, and he was dead serious. Also,
he was dead serious.
Also, he once put in "all that is gold does not glimmer" or something like that, which is the Lord of the Rings quote.
A quote.
And we were like, Dad, that's what?
That's not
and
a
he's
character.
like, who says this? And I'm like, but that's not the game.
He was just getting it so wrong. That must have been like his maiden voyage.
Yeah, and Carlos Naquet, of course, is another joke.
Carlos Naquet,
because like some musician my dad loves, who
famous flautist.
I still have no idea where
Shout
my
out
dad
to
found this guy. Our dad went into like a real. I think it's safe to say our dad from 1992 until the early 2000s was in a complete new age phase.
Oh my God. It started with the Ankh tattoo, probably.
Yeah, he has
right?
an Ankh-like cross tattoo on his chest. I was telling Mike about that because he came and visited recently, had his cross hanging out of his, our dad's very Catholic. And I was like, oh man, you should see his tattoo on his chest. Did I'm sure he will one day. But yeah, and then he just kind of went off the, he didn't go off the deep end. I think he had a midlife crisis.
That's what happens. Yeah. He didn't do the Porsche and the golf thing. He did the Ankh tattoo. Tai Chi was a big thing with him. I don't know if he still does that. I was just talking about a friend of mine who does Aikido for 20 years. And I was like, yeah, my dad was really into Tai Chi and Qi Kung for a long time. But then I got to thinking, like, is he still doing that? I don't think so.
I don't think so. No, because when he was here, I was talking to him like, our dad, after 9/11, our dad was there, obviously. He was really paranoid. I mean, our dad has to go in every 6 months for like a full workup still for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
On the government's dime, of course. But he was really paranoid afterwards. And so he used to take like this, I used to call it his AIDS cocktail. He used to get mad at me because I was like, because you know what I'm talking about? It was like he had a shelf that he built in our kitchen that like a spice rack, but it was just vitamins.
So
instead of spices, it was just vitamins, literally 50, 60, 70 types. And he would literally take these things by the handful. And I was telling him, he doesn't do that anymore, but I was telling him, we did glean a few interesting things out of that experience.
Oh, yeah.
Echinacea was one of those things that stuck around. That's a good one. Echinacea is really good. Vitamin C, of course, is good. Vitamin E, all the rest. So,
of course.
A broken clock is right twice a day. But Dad, we had to take a swipe at you. It's only been
we had to do it, Dad.
7 minutes into the show. All right. Oh, as far as I'm concerned, I'm just, what I'm realizing recently? First of all, how cool is my Cobra Air
I was
Force
going to
shirt?
start with that. That's a brilliant shirt.
So Cobra Air Force shirt, maybe the only one in existence. I've been meaning to show you, Dagan.
Yeah.
There is a cosplay group called The Finest. I think I might have like tweeted at you a few times.
Okay.
They're a G.I. Joe cosplay group. Dude, the shit is nuts. I mean, like I can't even believe it. You know how my dream has always been to get a biker scout outfit? I'm still going to do that. But these guys make cut because you can't just go buy a Cobra outfit, from some store. You have to have it custom built for you or custom make it yourself. But there are people that do them.
Right.
And I'm like, man, there are probably 5 or 6 outfits. First of all, they take these montage pictures where I'm like, this is insane. I mean, characters like Chuckles and Big Boa and like random characters. It's awesome. Dr. Mindbender. And I was telling Mike, now this character's after your time because he came out in 1989, I think, in the comics, and the toy came out in 1990. But I really want to be the character Metalhead, who is
man, that'll be cool.
Because he has like, so he's a bad guy and he has like goggles on, but he's an idiot. Like, so he is always blowing shit up. He basically has rocket launchers all over his body.
Awesome.
And the toy was awesome. Like the rocket launchers on his arms, on his back, on his legs, and he had like a gun or whatever. but he always like would blow up the wrong thing because to shoot the missiles, he'd have to say bang, and so he would always like say it and then get pushed. And then like
that was a great era.
It was awesome. It was awesome. He's like bang, bang. And I loved that character. And I'm like, oh man, I'm not going to do it because I have no artistic skill, but I have some autistic skill, but I don't have any artistic skill.
Yes, you definitely do.
But I want to like hire one of these people and be like, I want a metalhead fucking outfit, dude. Like, and I'll see you guys at Dragon Con or something like that. Something
would be huge.
Yeah.
I'm going. If you're doing that, I'm going to go. I'm not going to dress up, but I'm going to go.
How about Tomax? I was thinking you and I could be like Tomax and Zaymot,
that
but
would be kind of fun.
like but from the comics where they wear suits and they have like and they have like just the Cobra crest on their suits and stuff.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
That would be cool with the suits. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Anyway.
Yeah, you got to do it, man. Hold me to this. Halloween's coming up. You could have done a trial run.
All I'm concerned about now that I live in the suburbs is getting the hell out of here on Halloween. How can I leave my, because I leave a copious amount of candy out, but I'm like, I don't know none of this.
You do understand 2 14-year-old kids are going to come and take it all at one time.
Well,
right?
I have a camera. So last year I did this. Remember, I don't know if we might have had this conversation last year, but I did this last year.
Yeah.
And then I had like the camera set up or whatever. I have like, the security system here. And I put out like a thing of, because we didn't really know anything about COVID still at that time. So I put out a thing about hand sanitizer and then the candy and then the bowl. And I think Uncle Mike was like, well, they're going to take everything. And I'm like, well, we'll see. But what ended up happening was they left the bowl, the candy was gone, and they took the hand sanitizer.
That's well, they needed it.
Yeah.
People do need it right now more than ever.
Sure. So, I mean, if people want to do that, that's on them. But I'm going to put out like a little, because we usually go to Dana's, or that's what their tradition is here, is go to Dana's for Halloween.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do that because I just don't want, the trick-or-treating thing is very uncomfortable for me. Like, I'm like,
just do it.
No, I'm not going to do it. I'll leave the bowl of candy out with a little sign like I did last year. Happy Halloween, be safe, take what you need, And I was thinking about even going crazier with it. And because this is something people would steal, but maybe we try it.
Yeah.
Is just get like a bunch of like real candy bars and just kind of like make a little brick wall of them on my stand and just be like, take,
You're going to be the cool house that hands out the full-size candy bars, but you're not going to be there to reap the glory.
I feel like that's even more baller, though.
Yeah, that is kind of more.
Because there's a mystique. Yeah. You make eye. The kids are playing hopscotch in the street. A few days later, you make eye contact with them briefly. They know you know.
Look of awe in their eyes,
right?
And gratefulness, dude. I'm also thinking maybe the camera, especially if you're not going to be there, the camera as deterrent. Like have the big. It doesn't even have to be hooked up. Just the giant camera, but like a foot away from the bowl. Like, would that work, or would they steal a camera?
Yeah, they probably still. Yeah, get like an old 1980 CR, like a huge Sony installation there that would be hooked up to like a small monitor. Yeah, we would be ridiculous. All right, well, that's coming up, and I mean, since we're recording this in October, obviously, KnockBack is good anytime, any place. But because of Halloween, we're doing today the movie Ghostbusters, 1984 film.
What?
Now, I'm excited to talk to you about this movie because I've got a problem with this movie.
Oh, I can't wait to get into this.
And I think my instinct about this movie was reaffirmed upon watching it again.
Okay.
I haven't seen this movie. I was telling Micah, it's possible that I never seen this movie all the way through. The reason is because it was always on TV, so you would just see it constantly, right? So you see like this, and you see this, and you see this, and I'm like, I don't know, man. From 1988 to 1994, I mean, I probably saw most of everything that was on HBO or Showtime or something at that point. But who the fuck knew? I mean, we didn't know. We were just tuning in.
Good
right?
point.
And that was before even, as we said before even overlays on TV. Like when you turn on a channel, you had no idea what you're even watching. So like that was the old game. Is like, how long could it take you to figure out what the hell this was? 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then
true.
So that's an auspicious time for sure. But upon watching it front to back as an adult, I feel like this movie is really funny and really well acted. I think there's a lot of great performances in it. And I think Rick Moranis is actually particularly awesome in this movie.
He's so good.
But I feel like and this might be because of my television watching sensibilities. This movie moves really quick, unnecessarily fast. It doesn't let anything marinate enough for you to care. And so it really embraces its comedic roots, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But the reality is that there's so much more potential under this than that, and they kind of squandered it. And I understand that this movie is beloved, and this is one of the beloved 80s properties. But like I said, my feeling has been confirmed. I don't understand why that is. There are many, many, many 80s movies better than this. And you can rattle them off and that don't get as much love as this. And I know that the sequel, which I don't remember at all, I think I went and saw it when I was a little kid. So I think it came out in 1989 or 1990.
Yeah.
But I don't even remember that. And I just feel like this has been kind of hanging on based on this one-off film that for some reason has this fan base that I can't relate to. And Dylan Paulson actually wrote into us on Patreon and said, "Hi guys, long time, first time. I'll keep this short.
Okay.
Is Ghostbusters a lightning in a bottle type 80s comedy that can never be recreated? Or is there enough lore and heart in this first movie to be the start of a great franchise?" See, the ironic thing about that is that I think they ignored everything in the movie that could have made it a franchise. And so it becomes much more of like a slapstick one-off comedy, but I don't know. I'm going on and on. I'm really curious what you think of 1984's Ghostbusters.
I love where you're starting with this, man. I think this is going to be such a good conversation. I think it's awesome. Yeah, I mean, now, know this for our listeners. This film has been on the list for KnockBack from the beginning. We were just waiting for the opportune time to do it. I think I felt like it was cleverly slid in. It'll be just in time for everybody for Halloween this year, so that's kind of fun. And fortunately, also, it kind of dovetails with the third sequel finally coming out, Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is coming out around Thanksgiving. So fortunately timely. It wasn't really intended that way, but that was a opportune coincidence that I thought was fun. And then I love hearing your story with this because you were as of yet unborn, hanging around little gingerbread Colin in mom's belly still when this came out in the summer of '84. You wouldn't come out for another few months. And
I had yet to premiere.
You had yet to make your debut.
Right.
Which is very interesting. And for my story, Kyle, which I think you know, is I've only seen this movie once during its initial theatrical run in 1984. It's the only time I've ever seen this movie. There's only one iconic piece of pop culture, filmic material that has that same thing for me. And we're going to talk about that at Christmas time. So we're not going to talk about that yet.
Okay.
So I was really... a lot of this conversation for me, having only seen it one time, is, and knowing, of course, the pop culture / nerd culture phenomenon this movie is and was, and the franchise. Now, no, this is about the 1984 film. It's not about Ghostbusters 2. It's not about the 2016 reboot, Melissa McCarthy reboot. It's not about Afterlife, obviously, or any of the video games or any of the other subsequent
the cartoons,
spin-offs.
the real Ghostbusters.
The real Ghostbusters cartoon, which I'll bring up later a little bit, but we won't talk about that too much in depth. It's great. One of the great animated series of the 80s.
Yeah, I used to actually like that cartoon when I was...
so good, dude.
I used to watch it. I think it was on after G.I. Joe.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Weirdly, it came a couple of years after. I think it debuted in 86, the animated series.
Yep.
But I really wanted to see, a lot of this for me was going in and seeing what all the fuss is about. Not in a pessimistic way, not in a curmudgeonly way. I wanted to see, like, let me see what has its talons, its hooks in everybody over all these years. And knowing, like, really remembering 1984 and probably post Star Wars, Star Wars Empire, Return of the Jedi, this was like a pop culture phenomenon that maybe even exceeded Star Wars. And I say that because I remember in 84, 85, mid 80s, moms and dads were rocking the t-shirts. It wasn't just kids and neckbeards. You know what I mean? It was like for everybody. It was the song, the top 40 soundtrack, especially the theme song, which went to #1 on Billboard, the shirts, the products, the lunch boxes, the toys, the action figures, the toy proton packs. Like, I remember going to carnivals in 1984 and 1985, the little town school carnivals, face painting. You wanted the Ghostbuster sign painted on your face. That image the universal no sign with the ghost through it, was one of the most popular images of my youth. I mean, it was everywhere. And Ghostbusters was literally everywhere. It took Star Wars a step further for me as far as pop culture largeness or largesse, because it just was literally on the tips of everybody's tongues. It seemed to transcend generations. So I couldn't really wait to get into it. And the other thing that occurred to me, Kyle, was like, this is a really unique movie, because I went in really analytical to enjoy it. It's only an hour, $1.45.
Yeah,
very enjoyable,
very
like you
watchable.
said, very quick, almost flop sweat quick, like they wanted to get in and out. There's so much to say about it, but to me, what I had occurred to me while I was watching was like, wow, this kind of blends, this film very uniquely blends comedy, sci-fi, and horror, which were all very big genres in the mid 80s. And I can't wait to get into it with you. A big part of the conversation that I was excited about to sort of cross into with you was like how your initial experience with it and how you've experienced it since, but also like the question on the largest question on my mind is still, even after watching it a couple of more times, getting really into it, is were they intending this movie to be as big as it got? Or did it get so big in spite of itself? In other words, it's the comedy, the writing, very bankable stars coming out of film and SNL and everything, the genres, the effects, the budget. It had everything going for it. But I feel like it got even bigger than anybody could have possibly ever anticipated. And I think for me, that's a very interesting part of the conversation. Like, even going in now, it's like, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a really enjoyable film. I think it's a very quick watch. I think Bill Murray is magnetic in this film. I think it's very unique, again, in blending all those genres, but I'm not sure what the alchemy is that made it this big. Like, why is Playmobil still making Ghostbusters sets?
I have no idea.
Why is Lego, merchandise, products, people dressing up with the proton packs 35, 40 years later? You know what I mean? Like, what is at the root of this thing? What is at the core of this thing that makes it as large as it is? And you could, relegate it to the one movie. I mean, of course it had its sequel, and that's probably a big part of the conversation too. But besides those initial two films, what do we got here? Like, what is at its base? What is at the core, the meat that makes this thing like transcend time, basically? It's so crazy.
Yeah, because someone had written in, I didn't end up using their inquiry, I was just looking, but they had said like they feel about this the way I felt about Back to the Future, which is a similar thing to the way I feel about this. I actually, in some ways, consider them exactly the same in that regard, where it's like, what? I mean, this is good stuff, but I don't know about what the gravitational pull of this universe is. Because I think all of the potential in the film, first of all, the film is incredibly well written. I mean, I would never deny that at all. That really witty dialogue, really funny characters and acting, all of the pieces are there. And I think one of the interesting things is, not being a fan of Ghostbusters, I think I've kind of been, if anything, I was kind of going into watching this movie a little higher than I probably should have been, because a good example would be, I'm a huge fan of Red Letter Media, which I think you are too, and especially the Plinkett reviews, which are just hysterical and so witty and funny. I wish that's all they did. I understand why they don't, because it's really hard to do. But I watched the Ghostbusters 2016 one, and I have never seen that movie, the female one. And in that production that they do, they talk a lot about the original Ghostbusters and how it's really, really good, and it does this, and this really well. And so I was like, okay, like, we'll see. And I guess maybe I'm missing something, but I went in, and while understanding the finer points of what they were saying, I don't think the movie, in fact, I was kind of bored by the end. I was like, why is this I was with the movie itself.
Yeah.
Because I was like, why can't you just slow down for a minute? And I think that it was the pacing of the movie that really got me, because, they're at college and they're a university. And I really like the scene with the cards and the attractive female student, and he's shocking the dude and all that. It's good stuff. Scene. but so like you're kind of getting the vibe of everyone, but you only get the vibe really of Bill Murray's character, right? You don't of Venkman, right? That's Venkman, right? And then so with Stantz and with Spengler, and Zettermore later on, you never really get to know them.
No.
Right? Like,
nope.
We know that Spengler's kind of the wide-eyed one. We know that, that I guess Egon would be kind of the Donatello I was kind of thinking of. Like, it's we get that, but why can't we get to know them a little bit more? And I found the whole thing with Ernie Hudson's character peculiar because I didn't remember that really, where they find him later and you don't really even. In fact, it's so ridiculous because he comes in and they're like, yeah, you're hired. It's almost like a joke in the script to just get him in. But it's like, why wasn't he just part of your crew to begin with then?
It's strange.
Like, I didn't really understand that. I thought that, Annie Potts as Janine, great character, really fun character. We get to know a little bit about her. She's like she considers herself very smart and stoic and all those kinds of things. Like, spend a little bit more time with her.
Yes.
And then we meet like these random, like William Atherton's character Peck, the EPA agent, like he comes out of nowhere.
It's very
right?
strange.
Then it's just I don't really. So I had a hard time really staying with it because by the end I was just like, I just want this to be over. I don't. It's not that it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I just think there's so much potential for this to have been so much smaller. And maybe that was the thing that bothered me digging was, why did the movie need to move so quickly and then be so big? If a movie is going to move quickly, it can still be small. It would have been much cooler if they just remained a ragtag group that no one believed the entire time, right? And then maybe they have some sort of revelatory thing. But the thing they have is like they're this huge thing in the city at the end and blah, blah, blah. And the Peck lets the spirits out and all that. It becomes this really huge movie. And I think that also, in my opinion, injures it. It's almost like, how do we get the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man? We have an idea for the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. How do we get that to occur in the movie, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
So
you make a lot of good
I feel
points.
like I'm beating the shit out of it, but I think it's just because the people involved in it are such high caliber people.
Yeah.
That I think maybe that's why they get a little bit of, I don't want to say a pass, but why people are like, yeah, how can you not help but love something that these SNL cats are in? Ivan Reitman's in there. I mean, Ivan Reitman did Meatballs and Stripes, and he has, connections to National Lampoons and Alpha House and all these things, right? Like, it's good. These guys know comedy. Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to look at Bill Murray or Dan Akroyd and be like, these guys don't know fucking shit.
Yeah, absolutely. Comedy is absolutely.
But at the same time, I think people would also look at me and say like, well, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And I think that is true. The movie, I was a little surprised. You know how on Amazon it shows you the IMDb score?
Yeah.
Like the critic score. And it's got a 7.8, which is lower than I thought it would be. As an example, Battlestar Galactica, which we were doing kind of concurrent to this, is a 9.5 on there.
Is it really?
Yeah. So
wow. Holy cow. As a series, not seasonal.
The series.
As a whole collective series.
Right. Rotten Tomatoes or whatever. So
yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where I stand on that. How does that strike you? The rapidity and just, it's kind of like it's like a car going down the road just grabbing people as it's going, but we're like, who the fuck is this guy? Where did this guy come from? Who's this academic throwing you out? Who's, what happened to the librarian? What?
Yeah, it flies. It is. Yeah. No, you're right. You make a lot of great points. I think it's good for a feature film to be snappy. It's good for a feature film to not overstay its welcome. But I think one thing this movie has going for it is, I think its best look is channeling like a 1984 movie theater sort of nostalgia. You got your popcorn, you got your Raisinets, you got your cherry Coke, it's a blockbuster, it's a big picture film. You want to see it on the large screen. And I think at its core, it's a feel-good movie, right? It's an uplifting movie. It's a lot of fun to watch. It's quick. But I think what you said that strikes a chord in particular is that there is so much strong stuff at its core, at its foundation, and that's very unique. And I think you want to learn more about the characters. You want to learn more about the tech. How did these guys get together? What's the genesis of, all of these things? And fleshing them out more. where Bill Murray's character really is the only one with an inherent personality. And I almost feel like the characters, the main four in particular, like you almost do have that Ninja Turtle dynamic where it's like, oh, you got these four guys, four heroes, four protagonists, pick your favorite. But the other three characters are much more watered down and diluted. We don't get a lot. You got to kind of read into each one of those other three characters just to get a little more substance, where he is the only, Bill Murray really steals the show. And it occurs to me a few times, especially with the Dan Akroyd character, it's like he's almost purposely ceding the stage to let Murray shine or let Murray take center stage. You know what I mean? It was almost like the movie served largely as a Bill Murray comic vehicle. You know what I mean? Where it was like the other characters even kind of fade to the background a little bit to let him come forward a little more, which is kind of odd. I do get that resonance from the movie. It's like, I think a lot of it is having to read into it. And a lot of those very things that you talked about are the reasons why we're questioning why this is such a pop culture mainstay. How did it survive so long and maintain the top of the dog pile as far as like merchandise, products, cosplay, conventions, on the tips of people's tongues with wanting more? Like, it's a very interesting conversation. It doesn't really bother me because I think I think bringing Back to the Future into the conversation was very smart on your part. It does make you feel like that. I think Back to the Future is a little stronger. There's less characters to juggle, so the characters are more fleshed out in Back to the Future.
Right, and even then we don't have any idea, like, why are these two friends?
No, it's unexplained.
Why? What the hell is going on here? And because for me, Dag, it's like with Ghostbusters,
yeah,
they reach the pinnacle of the story, in my opinion, when they go to the library. Now, the library intro is really cool. And then they go to the library to investigate. Now, that should have been the whole movie, is like, what's going on at the New York City Public Library? And we're going to figure out what's going on in this place. And it's haunted. Or at the Sedgwick, like the hotel's a really cool setting too.
Yeah.
I like the hotelier. Like, I think he's an interesting and funny character. He plays that very uptight 80s guy very well. But I want to ask you, and by the way, before I forget, I should also say, because you brought up the iconography many times, no one would deny that icon is awesome. I mean, I look at it sometimes and actually do laugh because it's like the ghost face is so funny. Like, he's like being caught, like in a spotlight. It's
clear. Yeah, and I think
it is awesome.
That probably, I mean, obviously the universal no sign was a big thing with no smoking and all that kind of stuff. But I think the universal no sign was like put on the map as a cultural thing, as a direct result of Ghostbusters. Like, no whatever was in that circle became like a big thing. Like, this was you can't even overstate the acting, the logos, the genre defining, the fact that it was a triumvirate of genre defining performances and just storytelling, but also like just for quotes. This movie is one of the most quotable films of probably the last 50 years. Which again is a big part of the conversation. It's like, how did this happen? I can't wait to dig down and see if we could come up with any answers. It's such an interesting conversation. It really, I really enjoyed it. I loved seeing it a couple of more times. I get why it's popular because I think it just has that happy, optimistic, no pressure. It's just like something that's fun. And I think maybe you would argue you need that now more than ever in 2021. But, just digging down from a mid-80s perspective is interesting. And also a really kind of a love letter to mid-80s New York, which was also a cool thing for me. And maybe it makes me a little more biased towards the film, too.
Certainly. And I think New York could have even been more of a character in some ways as well. Like, I don't think they even brought that to bear as much as they could have either. But one of the interesting things that I wanted to ask you about was your first time seeing it through this lens. Timothy Martin wrote in and said, "Hi guys, great topic. As a kid in the 80s, I was convinced this was a horror movie. As an adult, I realized this is comedy gold. Has time and maturity changed your outlook on the film, or did you always get what Reitman was going for?" So I'm curious if you recall your feelings on the film at that time. It must have not been very strong for you not to have returned in an era where you're playing with G.I. Joe, you're playing with Transformers, all of those kinds of things. So there was this new ecosystem for you to jump into that you opted not to.
Yeah.
So that must be some sort of sign about how you felt about it at that time. But I'm wondering if you do remember anything about that time, and if you felt that it if you were like trepidatious and scared. Because I think one of the interesting things that they do in that intro with the librarian is the music indicates that it's not a horror movie and that it's more of like a zany mystery of some sort.
That's a great point.
I think they do a nice job of like balancing the two. But talk to me a little bit about if you do remember that summer viewing, and if you remember how you looked at the movie, if you were scared or whatever.
Yeah, I went to, this was one of the movies that Aunt Joni took me to in 1984. And during that sort of 2 or 3 years, I was seeing a lot of movies with her on the weekends. You know, I would go stay at grandma's, go out with Aunt Joni, you know, Karate Kid, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters was a big one. All the blockbustery movies of that era we went to go see together. So I remember seeing it at night, and I remember thinking it was fun. And I don't remember, I was 10, I would be 11 later that year. I don't remember being scared by it. I remember, one thing I remember was Bill Murray in particular. I knew there was something to him, even though I didn't really see a lot with him at that point, because I remember mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, our aunts and uncles, like laughing at him on TV because of his SNL performances in the 70s into the 80s. So I already remember like he was a thing, like he was somebody to watch, and I guess I felt that magnetism even though I didn't really know his shtick at that time. So I remember really kind of feeling like Bill Murray was a thing, and then also the effects. You know, I felt like a lot of those effects, where they were hand animated effects, early CG, the stop motion, the rear projection, the colored gels, all that kind of stuff, like practical effects and all that. I remember feeling like kind of lumping that visual treatment in, and maybe this was ILM's, imprint or fingerprint on the thing, but I remember kind of lumping it in with like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Poltergeist, Empire Strikes Back. Like it felt the same to me. When you see the devil dogs running, you know it's a stop motion, and it kind of looks like the Tauntauns. I remember feeling like, okay, like this is in the same vein, or this was made by the same hands as the people that created those other things. And maybe the first time I realized that, especially in a feature film capacity, like, okay, the same teams of people are making these things. They're doing the stop motion skeletons in the Poltergeist pool in the backyard, and they're doing the ending at Raiders where they're, the spirits are coming out of the Ark of the Covenant and all that kind of stuff. Like, all right, these are the same people. I remember responding to that, but also like from a collecting standpoint, I'm not sure how fast I remember the t-shirts being a big thing right away. But as far as toys and lunchboxes and merch and everything like that, I think two things. One, I was starting to get out of that stuff at that age. I was starting to make my way out. And I had to be very selective, because you got the report card Christmas birthday thing. It was like Star Wars, Transformers, and G.I. Joe was enough. Like, even if something was really cool, I wasn't even going to be going in for it. Like, I wasn't going to go into the Karate Kid toys, even though I liked the movie. So, we had to be very selective back then with like the things that we collect. At least I felt that way with the things we collected. But now, funnily enough, now I could see like the Ecto-1. I think it's all, and the proton packs and the meters and everything. I think they're amazing. Like the siren sound of the Ecto-1 is one of the coolest sounds I could think of from 80s films. I just wanted to hear it over and over again. You know what I mean? I was like, wow, that's an amazing. It's a character. That's one of those things, like the DeLorean in Back to the Future. It becomes another important character and an 80s touchstone.
So you had brought up obviously the characters before and how Bill Murray kind of shines and more than the others, and I found that ironic because it's Akroyd and Ramis that wrote this movie.
Yeah.
So it's interesting too that they kind of took a backseat, at least it seems, to another comedic mind in some way. But I was wondering if we can get into some of these characters specifically, because in my mind there are really only 6 characters of consequence, like the 4 Ghostbusters, 3 + 1, 4 Ghostbusters. Harold Ramis's character and Sigourney Weaver's character are in my mind really all that were relevant. You have Peck and some other people, but so talk to me a little bit about how you feel about these various guys and what they bring to the table. I mean, I like early 80s comedy, Stripes, that kind of stuff. Like there's something to like about Bill Murray, and I guess that late 70s, early 80s SNL feel that is quite foreign today. to, and I think that humor is actually quite foreign today. It's unique and it's interesting, and there was only a certain amount of people that could really pull it off. So I liked, Venkman kind of being the clown, and Stance kind of being the wide-eyed believer, and Egon kind of being the tech, and all of the rest. And again, it just made me regret that we didn't get to see them more in their academic setting, because it would have been cool for them to have gotten kicked out later in the movie. Like, they're investigating things in New York at the New York Public Library, and then academics kind of get involved, and they're like, what are you guys doing, and all that. There's just a different way to kind of, in my mind, have written the movie such that we got to know these guys a lot more as a crew. Why are they so ride or die for each other? Like, we don't even know why.
No clue.
Ray Stantz goes and takes out another mortgage at 8% or something, and it's funny because he then just like wastes the money, and they have to kind of stand back and do it because it's his money. So they buy the shitty firehouse. I love how he's like, he bought the hearse or whatever for like $4,800 or something like that. It's like outrageous amount of money back then. And so it's very funny, but I wish we just got to know those guys in that academic setting more. And I can't help but feel like the card scene with Bill Murray with Venkman is with the girl and the guy is like one of the great scenes, because it's the only time we really get to, or one of the only times we really get to see him and his kind of skeevy element. We see it a little bit with Sigourney Weaver and him as well, but that's kind of how I feel. I mean, how do you feel about this cast?
Yeah, I mean, you said it so well. That scene where the Venkman character is testing the two kids, like the nerdy kid and the hot girl, and he's doing the ESP test, and he's obviously really biased to the cute girl. It's a really great character building scene, and it's one of the few. This movie really has you wanting, at least for me, and I'm sure you're the same way, it has you wanting more as far as the character relationships and their histories. There's even one scene, a brief mention, where Stantz says to Venkman, like, you never did study type thing. And you're just like, oh, give us more. Like, you're acknowledging that there's a history there, but that's it. It's glossed upon and then it's out, So you get you're spoon fed those little things, and you're left wanting more because they're characters with great potential. I think the Venkman character, obviously he's the sarcastic womanizer. I think Bill Murray's performance is really cool. He's like the front man of the band, right? And it does seem like the other characters or the other actors are kind of moving out of his way a little bit to me. You could kind of see that. And I wonder if that's due to like Bill Murray being a force of nature, or is that due to like the fear he instills? He's a famous curmudgeon, famously difficult to work with, famously difficult to get a hold of when he's not working, that type of thing. But the thing that I think is special about his performance is that he is this like seedy, swaggering, conceited, womanizing dude, but you still like him. You still like the character somehow. Like, definitely. Despite the bravado, there's something still gregarious about him. And I found myself responding to that and asking, like, why do I still dig this dude? And I think it's because you see him genuinely caring for his friends and stuff, too, at the same time. So he's got that gray mixed, he's obviously a little bit shady. He's obviously a little bit coming on too strong to the women. But you see that he cares for his friends and stuff. So you have that balance. So he feels real, which is actually a cool character trait, to give him a little gray and like this comic vehicle. But I found myself getting the most frustrated again with the Ray Stantz character, because you said the wide-eyed thing is a great description. He's the sincere straight man basically, and very much like Linus from Charlie Brown. Like, he's smart, wears his heart on his sleeve, but he's really an underdeveloped character. If you look at him, you really almost like he's purposely again seeding the stage so that Murray could, shine a little bit more, which is unfortunate because I want a little more from Akroyd, especially knowing that, he co-wrote this thing and a lot of it was supposedly founded on his real life belief in the supernatural and the fact that he's really into that as in a hobbyist capacity. Like, he's really down for reading about it, and supposedly it runs in his family. Like, his grandfather was really into it and stuff in real life. So, again, it would have been really cool to have a little more of that fleshed out Leo, Raph, Mikey, Donnie type thing going on with the character. I feel like they were almost there. We just needed a little more. Whether the movie needed to be a little longer to show a little bit of those histories or flesh that out, I'm not sure. And then, you know, Egon is an interesting character too, because you hear everybody say the same thing about Egon. And I love Harold Ramis. I think he's very appealing. But, you know, you have this brilliant but socially awkward geek, you know, the prototypical geek that we would see in an 80s film. But the thing that strikes me that you never hear anyone talk about is like, he's not socially awkward. He's unapologetically awkward. There's a difference. He's purposely being aloof. You know, he's a little bit more of that brand of nerd, like the unapologetic, like, I'm the tech geek. I know the chick's interested in me. I'm not really interested, like that type of thing. But you wanted to see that, you want to see that more pushed to the foreground too. Like, you know, he kind of plays it back a little bit. You got to, again, read into it. And then the Winston Zeddemore character, man, is just confounding. It's really, really one of the strangest parts of the movie. Again, he comes in late. I think he's intended as the everyday Joe, or as like the audience surrogate, like our proxy into this weird group of eccentric scientists.
Right, because he says like whatever, you know, if it comes with a paycheck, I'll believe whatever.
Right, he's the workaday guy. You know, he's there for the paycheck. He's there to get the job done or whatever. He's extremely likable. I think Ernie Hudson is I think he's a great character actor. It was interesting to look at his filmography and know that he was in TV like dating back to like the Dukes of Hazzard and Different Strokes and the A-Team and all these other things. Maybe Maude and stuff like that. So he was an interesting choice because I know when Dan Aykroyd was developing it still for other actors that Eddie Murphy was in that sort of contingent of people that were supposed to be in it. And when Murphy, I guess, committed to 48 Hours or became Eddie Murphy and dropped out, and Belushi passed away, who was also supposed to be in it, was, of course, one of Dan Aykroyd's best friends. I wonder if he was the answer to having a Bill Murray type in it, even though he's not really a Bill Murray type. Did they want to, did they feel like they had to have some racial diversity in there? I don't know. I don't hear
That's how I felt. I mean, that's how
even in researching it, you don't hear anybody talk about it. So it's a very, even though, Winston Zeddemore is he has some great lines in the film and stuff. Again, he's like, you want more. It's like, give me more of this dude.
And I could figure out a way to get him in the movie in a better way. If you wanted to assume that he's just the everyman, he's more of a blue collar guy working with these PhDs or whatever, then it would have been cool if he was at the college with them and he was like the janitor on their floor, but something like that. I'm not, trying to demean the character, but he's the janitor. He's the engineer on the floor, or the building ops guy. And he likes these guys. And when they get fired, he's like, fuck it, I'm going to go with them. I like them. I like their experiments and all that. Like there's a way to like bring him in from the beginning.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't feel like they just graft him on later. And again, that scene with Janine and him, where I think it's Dan Aykroyd, where they just like, yeah, you're great, you're hired, take the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it almost seemed knowing, like, what? Why are you, what?
Like this.
It just, did you even ask for, like, when did we even know that you were looking for help, by the way?
We find out like 30s. I mean, why not make him like the fourth musketeer? Maybe they have a scientific background with him. They went to school with him. He's the kind of the guy hanging around with them all the time, but he's the famous non-believer. He's the naysayer that gets sucked in because he finally witnesses something. Like it could have been easy, you know what I mean? And make him feel like a contemporary at the same time.
Right. I like that. Like they all get fired and he's like, but I didn't do anything. And so he's kind of just with these dudes, right? That's another,
great.
Yeah.
Right? So, Harold Ramos, give us I know you passed away 7 years ago, but give us a call if you think of it. We're down.
From the other side.
Speaking of Ghostbusters.
So we talked a little bit about the Ghostbusters here, but I wanted to go in a little bit further onto Egon. I don't know why I was so interested in this character. There are little things that I really love. One of the scenes I like is when they're in the firehouse and they're eating Chinese food and they're talking about how it's like the last of their money. And he's like, he's not even eating. And they are like, let's cheers, whatever. And he just picks up his thing and cheers and then puts it back down. And he still just keeps working without eating. What I find funny about that scene is he's drinking a Coke and everyone else is drinking Bud. So there are little things where I'm like, I like this character. Like I like what they're trying to tell us about this character, his seriousness. I love his deadpan shit when he's like, they're basically like nuclear reactors on their back and stuff. And it's just like totally illegal and fucked up, all the things that they're doing. So I really did dig that character, but I wanted to get into what I think were the three characters, let's say, on the side, although they're all important. We have Dana Barrett, played by Sigourney Weaver. We have Louis Tully, played by Rick Moranis, and we have Janine Melnitz, played by Annie Potts. And I feel like these three performances are just as strong, if not stronger in some ways, even than the Ghostbusters themselves. And I think that's the one thing you can say about this movie definitively, or at least that I feel like I could say, is this movie has a very good cast, and the performances are really on point. The characterizations, the intent. I just think it's such a shame. Like, I know it's crazy to say it's Ghostbusters. What the fuck do I know about filmmaking? But to me, I just think, I'm like, damn, dude, this could have been like some cool stuff, more grounded and more scientific and more, it could have even been more comedic in that way too, because of the outrage. But what do you think about the side characters and how they play into it? And I got to tip my cap, especially to Rick Moranis, who I just think is, everything about him is funny in this. Like the way he walks, like when he runs and he's like waddling and he keeps locking himself out of his apartment, and it's good shit. The whole tax party scene is really funny when he introduces the people and he's going on and on about, he says something like, well, they got $15,000 left, but it's at 8%, so they're okay. Something like that. It's so good. So yeah, anyway, talk to me about these kind of extraneous characters.
Yeah, well, he's great. I mean, the Louis Tully character, seeing Rick Moranis, he feels so 80s. He has that funny physicality, and he's got that face. He's got that comedic mug, which is really funny. It's interesting to hear that John Candy was initially supposed to play this character. And I could see a different brand of comedy, a different flavor of comedy, a different brand of comedic physicality that went along with that. But I like Moranis just for the creepy, borderline, stalkerish neighbor. I think he's really funny in that role because he's this little kind of unassuming dude, but he's a little bit creepy. He's a little bit too forthright and everything like that.
He's like spying basically on because she's like, Sigourney Weaver's like tiptoeing
she can't
by
get down the hallway without him coming out his door.
Right, it's hysterical.
Which is a funny bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Rick Moranis is interesting to me. We think about Little Shop of Horrors. We think about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Apparently, there's a new one coming out this year.
Is he going to be in it? Is he in it?
Yes, he's
cool.
He's one of the main dudes. I think Josh Gad wrote it and he's co-starring in it. But Moranis came back, and I always heard about Rick Moranis that he announced his retirement a long time ago, and basically said, like, I'm not retired, but I'm only coming out of retirement to do very specific things. Like, I'm not retired, I'm just ultra selective, Right. But apparently he was a widower, and he basically left acting in the late 90s to care for his kids, which I didn't read. I had to read that on his Wikipedia and his filmography and everything, which is really interesting to me. And then he came back slowly in the aughts, and I think 10 years ago-ish with comedy albums and stuff, just returning to his comedic roots. But he was interesting in knowing that he always said, like, I'm not really an actor. Like, I would do Spaceballs or I would do Ghostbusters. And I felt like my role was coming in and making the performance, making the lines, making the reads and everything funnier than they were on the page. Like, that was my job to, like, plus things. But I wasn't coming in as, like, some actor to, like, be spoon-fed a writer's, like, precious lines. Like, that's not what I want to do. And you could see that in his performance. He's got that physicality blended with the funny delivery. He's got even the funny way he holds his mouth. Like, it's very specific just onto Rick Moranis. So, yeah, you couldn't imagine anyone else in the role, even though it's a lesser role, a supporting role. I think it's a lot of fun. The Janine Melnitz character, dude, for you guys who haven't seen the Afterlife trailer yet, I'll give you a second to get out of the room, but there's something I have to say about it. Even not being a big Ghostbusters guy, now, it's probably pretty common knowledge that everybody's reprised their roles for Afterlife, except for Ramis, obviously.
Do they explain it? Like, did he die in their lore or something like that?
Yeah, well, I don't want to ruin that. If you guys watched the trailer, it explains some of that, and it's
by the way,
touching tribute. Yeah, it's a very like, it seems like what they're modeling the story around, without any spoiling you guys anything. It seems like a very loving tribute to him specifically, which is, I think, really, really classy. What were we going to say, C?
Well, I was just going to say, I think Bill Murray was the reason that they never got to do it the right way, right? And I think a lot of people were mad. I think people were mad about that. And I think that he finally, because I don't think anyone expected Howard Ramis to die. And I think in his mind, he was just like, we'll get to it eventually. I really think that that's kind of what he was thinking,
That's a really great point. And the tragedy inherent in just waiting too long.
Right. So I think the 2016 Ghostbusters, which I didn't see and I have no
No, I haven't seen it
at
yet
all.
either.
People hate that movie, and I think that they couldn't leave it on that note. So I think that this is an interesting way to kind of go back to the well. And I think it was Red Letter Media that made the point that they're trying to revive Ghostbusters into like some sort of universe, a sub-production company and all of that.
Okay.
So this might be the way that they're attempting to do that again. And I was pleased that so many people were enjoying this film and seeing that it's like kind of getting bad reviews from,
That's
critics,
right. The reviews are out now, aren't they?
Is like that a lot of people are taking that as a great sign.
I think you could see it in the trailer. You got Paul Rudd, you got Finn Wolfhard, you got some who's in there. That'll help for the draw, but you could just tell by the trailer that it's going to be a proper send up to the original series. And I think what they're basing the story around is really touching. But seeing the Annie Potts character in the trailer and the one line she delivers got me emotional. And that's coming from not a Ghostbusters guy, although I love this movie. I think the 1984 movie is great. But yeah, I was like, wow. And it's little notes like that it's the movie's going to hit. They just got it right. And of course, Jason Reitman is directing it, so it's a legacy. It's a proper passing of the baton from Ivan Reitman. So, I think it seems like they're doing it correctly. But I love the Annie Potts character, and I probably talk about this maybe a little too much on the show. Maybe I'm showing my hand a little too much here, but for me, like one of those prototypical 80s cute nerdy chick characters.
Sure.
Just adorable. And I love the unflappable secretary / receptionist, cute but kind of cold.
Yeah, like disinterested.
Devoid of outward emotion, the telephone operator, like,
right.
Like, please hold, like, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, kind of like, sounds like Harley Quinn a little bit. That was a pretty good impression. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You know what? You know what? That's true.
Yeah.
Even though one's outwardly malevolent.
Right. But it's that, like that.
Yeah. The squeaky.
Yeah.
Almost like, I guess, like you could say the nanny.
Yeah, exactly. Fran Drescher. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Her delivery. But the thing about the Annie character that's cool is she does have that soft spot whenever Egon's involved because she has the crush on Egon. So that's a little bit of the dimension in the character. She might have the most dimension of any character, ironically, which is interesting. But Kyle, the last one I want to talk about, and I want to toss it over to you. I want to see what you think about Sigourney Weaver in this movie. She's, a franchise maven, right? Everybody thinks of her associated with the Alien franchise. Great actress. Has done awesome. A lot of really, could kind of switch between comedy and not taking herself too seriously and then doing really roles with a lot of gravity that she wins awards for. Like she could switch back and forth. I love that diversity, and having the ability to go both ways. But something that struck. Well, she does. More power to her.
Sure.
But, one thing that struck me about her in this movie is like, I said to myself at one point, I was like, man, she could really ground the hell out of a flick. She could take the oddest of characters and stories and things that are happening and make them feel completely real and believable. It's crazy. She's acting like a crazy person in this movie. And it feels, it's fun, but it feels like, like she's hamming it up a little bit, but at the same time, it's like, wow, like I buy this. And, like, of course, for me, that started with Alien, the first Alien, where she's in this unreal situation in this obvious fantasy setting where she's making everything feel so grounded. It's even though this is different, it's a very similar thing overall that she's achieving, with her acting. And, she was also quite beautiful. I don't think I realized how beautiful she was when she was young because they frump her up in Alien. It's a different thing 5 years prior. But I was like, wow, she was really pretty. And I think she's even older than mom and dad.
Yeah, she's 72. I was looking at that too because I was curious about her filmography. She pops up. We know who she is. I actually remarked to Micah when we were watching Ghostbusters, I said, shit, I don't even remember Sigourney Weaver being in this at all. And I was remarking, I'm like, 84, Alien 79. I was like, this might be it's funny you brought her up, her aesthetic specifically, because I'm like, this might be a surprise to a lot of people because she looks like a normal woman here. And like you said, Ripley in Alien's universe is basically asexual. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's devoid of sex.
Right. It's like Mass Effect in the sense that like there's certainly sex, but it's sexless, if that makes any sense. Genderless, let's say.
Sure.
Battlestar is the same way.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
dudes punching chicks in the face and stuff like that. That's just the way it goes. Not that you necessarily want to do that, but that's what happens in those spaces, Starship Troopers and shit like that. So, which was another thing we have to do at some point. Maybe the book, maybe the book will do. But with Sigourney Weaver, I was surprised to see that she didn't do very much in between Alien and this movie. So I think that, because I was like, 5 years, she must have gotten huge after Alien. So she probably did 7,000 things, but she didn't. I think she did like 3 movies in between Alien and this. So I think she popped back up for a lot of people, especially in this, it's not pre-home media, but for most people, it's pre-home media era where you're going to see Sigourney Weaver in the theater. You're going to see her in a trailer, and that's the end of seeing Sigourney Weaver. So I think it, I think it was probably a nice and interesting surprise to see her in this for people. And again, the 2 things that bothered me about her were number one, really interesting. Like, she's a musician. She's like a professional. She's an orchestral musician, but I don't even understand how we learned that about her before we were just expected to know that. So I think that they could have brought more to bear about that as well. And maybe she has her own thing in her own house, but maybe she's part of the library situation. Maybe she's out in the stacks looking at some old arcane music. And so again, I want to bring it all back to that area to kind of ground everyone and get to know them more through a specific lens. But the other thing I thought was just kind of strange about her performance was I didn't really understand her. I didn't believe her love of Venkman. Like, because Venkman is, she says, "You're so odd" to him. That's what she says. "You're so odd," which is funny because he's like giving an inner monologue to himself as he's leaving. It's a very funny scene, but it's like, why do you like this dude? He's a scumbag, right? Like, he's a scumbag. I love the line when he meets her outside the orchestra hall, and he's like, "You were the best in your row," or whatever. It's like a great line. It's like such a nonsensical line. So it's very funny. I wonder if some of it's ad-libbed. It might be, but I just never believed her relationship with him. Like, when she's walking out of the orchestra with that other guy, he has like a small case. It looks like he plays, I don't know, French horn or something. And it's like, well, what? Why wouldn't you want to be with that guy? He seems right. So I know it's a comedy and you're not supposed to really believe it, but I think the reason I find myself frustrated with all these angles is because there's so much potential to do even greater things here. And you had brought up earlier, Dave, New York being a character. It's totally true. One of the things that I think they do that detracts from New York being a character is that in her apartment, in Sigourney Weaver's apartment, it is clearly a set. And it bothers me. It really took me out of it because I'm like, why is this so, especially the night scenes? I'm like, this looks like shit. You are in New York City. It has a very specific look when you look out of windows in New York City.
Sure.
Go to a real apartment. You have like, it's not a small production they did. It's like $35 million or something. $30 million, a lot of money, 1984 to make a film. Yeah, Star Wars was made for $10 million as an example. So go and fucking rent an apartment in New York City, so we can get the cool shots that characterize the city. And it might be lost on other people, but to me, it was like, it's like I'm looking at fucking Gotham or something like that. It doesn't even look like New York. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, it just doesn't look right. And so I guess Ghostbusters, to me, all of this is just a tale of just not meeting my expectations in a lot of different ways, or maybe not taking full advantage of what I think would justify this film's fame. National Film Registry, Library of Congress kind of shit. I mean, that's a big deal. And that this film is on that level, but I just feel like I just feel like it's $1 short in every way.
Yeah, you know what? You're really right about that. You really do feel those scenes that, especially the big action scenes and the big set piece scenes, the Hollywood soundstage and sets. They kind of run up against the authentic New York backdrops. Like you're going out of your way to show the firehouse. You're going out of your way to show Central Park West, Lincoln Center, City Hall, the New York Public Library, like especially like what you're saying about the Sigourney Weaver character's apartment, Central Park West, a very distinctive part of the city. It would that would definitely play with Lincoln Center and what she does for a living with the music. Like, it's all mindfully concocted to feel like, all right, she lives in this part of the city. She lives at 60 something and like Central Park West, and she's within a stone's throw of the where she performs at Lincoln Center and all that kind of thing. I know that part of the city well because I worked there for years. And then you kind of take yourself out of it, especially people, authentic New Yorkers or people that know New York. you feel like, all right, now you're doing the sound stage. Now you're on some kind of Hollywood, backdrop set.
Yeah, like the top of the
type
building, the top of the the spire that they keep showing. I'm like, this looks horrible.
Yeah, it's bad.
It's
Sometimes
like
it's
I don't
bad.
know I don't know. Is that your intention for it to look horrible? Because we just did Labyrinth, which came out a couple years after this,
Sure.
and very different movies. But Labyrinth is immaculate, right? Like completely immaculate.
Yeah,
with
it's beautifully
sets.
done.
And this looks like shit. It just, that really did bother me too, where I'm like, man, you're in New York. Think about, I know you haven't played the Insomniac Spider-Man games yet, but even some of the Spider-Man films, like think about, as you said, New York being a character. We talked about the late 70s seminal gang film, The Warriors, and we were talking about how much.
I just watched that again recently.
Right, and a wonderful movie, and
So
New York
good.
is so vital in that. And you're right, 1984, this was probably filmed in 83, New York City is awesome. Probably
Very
filmed in like the
specific.
summer into the fall of 1983, it seems, and man, you could have captured a lot of great things. Now they did. You're right. They're outside of Lincoln Center. I think there's a couple scenes in Washington Square Park.
Yeah.
They're definitely in some different places, but I just feel like that bothered me a lot because I just couldn't stop looking out her windows. Where I'm like, this looks so bad.
Come on.
Yeah,
Tavern on the Green, Union Square. Like,
right.
Yeah, make it feel like, even if you don't know, I would argue, even if you don't know New York, it's probably something in the look and feel that feels authentic. And when you sort of take the audience out of that, it's jarring. It's like, all right, now it's a movie again, and it feels a little. You're right. A lot of those action scenes feel, because of the backdrops, especially, feel a little B-movie-ish. They really do.
It definitely does. And even I guess the high point of the movie for me is the middle, where they go to the Sedgwick. You meet that really funny kind of hotelier, and the woman's trying to get into the ballroom. They're fucking everything up. It's like pure comedy. They're shooting the proton packs at like the maid and just screwing up, just destroying this place. Very funny.
The Slimer scene.
Yeah, exactly, the Slimer scene.
Yeah.
But I think, and I really do love the library scenes, like in the beginning with the old woman and them exploring it. And I love when they get the first goo, like slime sample, and he's like wiping his hands on the books. I was actually thinking about that. I'm like, man, people must have been so mad at Bill Murray on the set because he was just wiping that shit everywhere, and they were really in the library, as far as I understand. So
yeah.
So I was like, oh my god, that must have been so annoying. But, and by the way, my favorite line is also in the hotel scene. I do want to shout this out when the guy is out. There's just a random like hotel patron outside the elevator, and he's like, "What are you supposed to be, some kind of cosmonauts?" It's a great line.
That actor is great too.
Yeah, like a good bit actor. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about as well was the grounding of the film with what I was surprised to see a shocking amount of product placement for a movie that I don't know if they you asked the question, do they know? And my answer is I don't think so, because even if you look at Ivan Reitman's filmography afterwards, like you can see the kind of movies they were making, like Kindergarten Cop, Twins, Junior, obviously a lot of like Schwarzenegger, stuff and all that. So like, I don't think that he was necessarily trying to get into the high art of comedy with this movie. But nonetheless, I think that one of the cool things about that is the grounding element of getting some of these brands in there. And I always like to talk about that. There's a scene where Egon's eating Cheez-Its. They drink a lot of Coke and Budweiser. Yeah. I love seeing Larry King. He's smoking a cigarette, but it's when he's still on the radio, which is awesome. So that was like, so cool. That was pre-CNN, cool. Because he obviously is famous for CNN, but CNN didn't even exist at this point. Casey Kasem isn't in it. I was bummed. He's on it though. Like you hear him. So they must have sent Casey Kasem like a thing, like, can you record a cool little bit for us? So it was cool to see that. I loved seeing Con Edison gear, because that just reminds me of being young. I remember my blocks were in a huge Con Edison bag that Dad got me.
Oh, that's cool.
And then seeing like some of the papers, like USA Today for 25 cents, which is funny because that paper has always been the most expensive. And The Atlantic, they do like a story in The Atlantic, which is still a publication today. I just think it's cool to see those kinds of touchstones and also see how little things change. That's always what I love. Like I love supermarket scenes in movies. We talked about when we did Kramer versus Kramer. There's that really great scene of them in the supermarket, and you just get to see how nothing has changed. Oh, there's Tide. There's Coca-Cola.
It's crazy.
There's Clorox. It's just, and this was like 1974 or something when they were doing that film. And it's 2021 when we're recording this podcast. So, and I also enjoyed, Dig, that technical talk and science. And I think this is another one of the things that they could have achieved more with. The movie seemed believable. And what I mean by that is, even though we know that at least one of them is kind of a confidence man, right? And has like a confidence game going with people, that they have PhDs and scientific credentials. And I like that they do talk about like, why can't we, even though it's like don't cross the streams, obviously a famous thing from Ghostbusters, but why not? Like, what's in the proton pack? How are they keeping the ghosts? How do these different devices work? And I really liked that they at least attempted to ground it in some sort of scientific reality, which is why I think that them being fired together would have been and they do, but getting fired together and understanding more of that element where they're almost like alchemists where no one believes their science. I just think that would have been really cool. So I found a little bit of a dissonance there, but I enjoyed those things as well. So I'll throw it back to you if you have anything to say about the brands or the science talk and all, and kind of the achievement or lack thereof of believability in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, with the brands, it is interesting what you said strikes me, because you realize the importance of advertising and brand and how some things really don't change. Like Coke is probably never going to change away from a red label. Like it's just too important. Is Tide ever going to change away from that orange and blue logo thing? Like, it's interesting how it's nostalgic, but it is just as interesting to see how things have changed versus how some things have stayed the same. I think there was maybe even some brands that don't exist anymore. Like there's a box of like Hi-Ho crackers.
Yeah, I saw them eating that too. Yeah, those are like butter crackers kind of, right?
And that was like a competitor for Nabisco, but I guess maybe they are still around in some iteration, but maybe one that didn't, withstand the test of time. And then like, of course, like the iconic, this is the one that really stole the show from me, the iconic blue Wise potato chip bag with like the yellow detailing awesome and the owl. Like that is something that has changed. And then, for me too, like, especially mid 80s, like that specific era, I love looking at the cars, the car models, and just, the way the cars were designed during that age. But also that was the time early to mid 80s where we started to see a rapid influx of Japanese cars. So Toyota, Subaru, Honda, all the Mazda, all the Japanese brands, they were starting to become really a lot more mixed in with the typical American brands, GM and Pontiac and all of those, which is really interesting. I love to see the old models, the taxi cabs. That's really cool. It's really a throwback to how it felt to first see the movie. What we go outside, and that was really what was on the streets. I love seeing that, and that the other thing too, something that they did very cleverly with something that an iconic part of the movie that I had forgotten about, Kyle, before I forget to mention it, is the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Of course.
It's first of all, it comes in the last 15 minutes of the movie. And
I like how they foreshadow it, by the way. I didn't realize as a kid, obviously. They foreshadow it in her kitchen.
With the bag of the egg scene where the eggs are frying on the counter.
Right.
I don't think I noticed that as a kid either. And it's funny because not only does it come so late in the film, but he's probably only on screen for 3 or 4 minutes. That whole encounter or that whole, boss battle is only a few minutes. But I always thought it was so clever to have this sort of, Mr. Peanut, Bob's Big Boys mixed with the Michelin Man type of character, but to have this like vicious, threatening kaiju character, King Kong meets Godzilla, but have it this cute thing. It was always such a big part of what I think about the imagery associated with Ghostbusters. It shocked me how short it was on screen. But I think we'll talk about the effects a little bit, but I think they handled it pretty well. They were able to, some of the compositing's a little wonky. Sometimes you could see it's rear projected onto the back of a set and stuff like that. It certainly falls short by today's standards. But I thought they were some of the least egregious effects, the Stay Puft stuff. It was a lot of fun to see that again because I forgot how they treated it.
Yeah, he is obviously iconic character, and it was cool to see Slimer too. I really like that character. It reminded me, God, it just brought me right back. Now I was thinking about how this was possible, and I think that I realized how it was. But I was like, man, I loved that green high C, but how do I remember that?
Ecto
And
Cooler.
yeah, and I was like,
Yeah,
that was
man.
from Ghostbusters 2, as I remember,
Okay.
right? Because
That must have come later.
right, because mom
Yeah,
used
I
to
think
buy like
late
the
80s.
big cylindrical metal, things, and you'd pop the hole in it
The
or
high
whatever.
C
I hate that
cans,
shit.
dude.
It's so gross when you think about it. Because then you put it in the fridge and it just absorbs everything in the fridge. It's like leaving butter out in the fridge. It's like,
Yeah,
oh.
really, that's true.
Yeah, like why don't you put fish and butter next to each other in the fridge and see how that works out for you? So it's so that always grossed me out. I hate exposed things in the fridge. Like Micah puts pizza, like a pizza box in the fridge. I'm like, oh, I'm never touching that again.
You can't because
no,
it's sucking
like you got to put it in a
up.
bag. You got to put it in a bag. Yeah.
Yeah, Ziploc. Ziploc
never
that shit, dude.
Again. The technical stuff, I was curious what you thought about that because some of it looked great and some of it looked horrible. And I felt like that scene after Harold Ramis with the creature escapes from his apartment, like the wolf type creature. I don't know if it's stop motion or something. I'm like, man, this looks horrible.
It's bad.
It's really bad.
It's bad.
But they did the best they could or whatever, I guess, with it. I wasn't really too impressed. I mean, it is 1984 though, so I guess we have to forgive them for that.
Yeah. It's fun to see a 1984 movie and the level of effects even in a big budget movie like this because it harkens back to that period and it's part of the nostalgia. It's part of those retro feels, The stop motion, well, I'll say this, the practical stuff in this movie is really cool. Like the cards flying out of the Dewey Decimal System, the drawers, the newspapers flying out of the newsstand. Like they made the practical effects feel really kinetic and organic and real in this. Like they did a great, and that could be done with strings and fans and you know what I mean? Spit and like a little bit of scotch tape. Like that stuff is easy if you know how to do it and you know how to make it look good on camera in that, in that frame ratio or whatever. So I love that. I think that stuff holds up. The stop motion, and I like that there's a hodgepodge. Like there's early digital stuff going on. I think there's some traditional animation of like the ghostly apparition entering the taxi cab's tailpipe. You could tell some of that's hand-drawn animation and then, done with like colored gels under glass and stuff. And then there's some early CG stuff, which is interesting to see too. And I think they might have treated the Stay Puft guy with a mixture of things, actually making mock-ups of like the big leg, but then some of it might have been a little early CG, some stop motion. But the stop motion stuff of like those demon dogs is like, it's pretty bad. Not only is it compositive, it's composited kind of in an odd way, like you could see the seams, but this came a year or two or three after the Tauntauns and Empire, after the Scoutwalkers and Return of the Jedi. Like there's a really egregious scene where that devil dog leaves the building and the Louis Tully character is running across the street and then jumps over the wall into Central Park. And the dog follows him. It's really poorly animated and composited. It just feels like almost like you're watching a student film or something. It's like, whoa. Like,
yeah, I definitely noticed how bad it looked.
Stuff didn't look good. The frame rate looked off. It looked like it was floating. There were no real mats to make it feel grounded. Like, again, you could see those seam lines. But for all in all, I really enjoy that because, again, you're judging it by today's standards 35 years later. It's going to fall way short no matter what. So you might as well go back and see like, how it was done back then. I feel oddly though, like this movie, think of something like Alien, right? Talking about Sigourney Weaver. Like we talked about Alien and we talked about how good those effects hold up and how grounded everything feels and how timeless in a lot of ways everything feels. Like they did such a good job that it holds up years later. I feel like this movie felt short. Like it feels like it arrives short of the mark, even for its time, which is odd when you have a big budget and you have big, studios like ILM behind it, or those fabricators, those animators, those compositors, early CG guys and girls. Like, it feels like they could have done a better job even for 1984 standards, and they didn't.
Sure, but
it makes it part of the fun now, talking about it years later.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it is what it is. It's there. I wanted to touch on a couple more things before we go. Andrew Hanwell wrote in and said, "Hello, Colin and Dagan. What are your thoughts on the idea that Ghostbusters champions small business versus overreaching government? It's the EPA that shuts them down and releases all the ghosts. Is this a libertarian movie?" I don't know that I see it that way, but it is funny because I was reading this Peck character in a very specific way, and when I was thinking about what the relevance of this particular character is, it made a lot of sense. The EPA was not, and environmentalism was not cool in the early 80s at all. And obviously Earth Day is 1970. That's far before, but people have to remember Jimmy Carter in the United States was president in the late 70s. He put solar panels on the White House and did all these kinds of things. And we got embargoed for oil and all. Everyone hated it. And I think everyone kind of blamed a lot of the badness, maybe rightfully so, in the late 70s on Carter and I think he was the first environmentalist, modern environmentalist in some way. So I think that Peck character was kind of trying to take the piss out of that feeling, and it made sense, but I just didn't understand where this character even came from or why he was necessary at all. They needed to release the ghosts, so they needed this guy to kind of force that to happen, but it just felt like a MacGuffin almost. Like, why is this dude here?
So
and
weird.
Yeah, so talk to me a little bit about the EPA guy, Peck.
Yeah. I mean, it really is probably one of the strangest things in the whole film when you really look at it. Again, it's like, okay, the guys need a baddie. They need an antagonist. They need somebody that represents an obstacle for them in the movie. I get it. Like, you need that for the drama, for the story, have a obstacle to overcome. And Walter Peck, the William Atherton, he does have that guy you love to hate quality to him. So he's definitely got that going for him. But making this guy some environmental EPA/DEP guy is so weird. Like, why not? I understand you have to fabricate some type of foil for the guys. Okay, right. They have to have some sort of challenge to surmount. But how could you could have made this guy a competing scientist. You could have made this guy maybe an occult figure that they're running afoul of. Maybe he's like, I wrote down, like, maybe he was like, he's a PI that got kicked off the NYPD because of the Ghostbusters, and he's exacting his revenge by going after them now. I wrote that in 3 minutes. Like, and I'm no genius. So there was a host of things you could do to make this character a little more interesting. And he really does feel egregiously like just placed in there to cause a problem and to come up with awesome one-liners like, "That's right, this man has no dick." That type of thing. He's just a dummy for that. He's just a prop, a stand-in for for Venkman to deliver his one-liners.
Yeah, I totally agree. Strange character, not needed. Jacob wrote in about a peculiar scene as well. He said, "What in the world is up with that ghost blowjob scene? Is it just a dream? I mean, he's wearing some kind of colonial general outfit, so maybe that's his fantasy, or is that the time period when this woman died and became a ghost?" He seems to have some kind of recognition that he is possibly in a dream as he looks around the room slightly confused, and he clearly feels something because he rolls out of bed, most likely in elation. So is the ghost one that they had recently busted? No pun intended. Has an affinity for Stance and poltergeisted the scenario in his head. At any rate, the scene must have been included at the insistence of Dan Akroyd. This thing seems right up his alley. Yeah, I was actually shocked by that scene just because I was like, isn't this a children's movie? Or it's supposed to be like some sort of accessible film. It came out right around the time when PG-13 was a thing, as we know.
Yeah.
Of course, we talked about that
good point.
on the show.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that seemed weird and off color in some way, like not like quite vulgar actually for the level of movie that I thought they were going for. What did you make of that scene?
It does feel very one-off-ish, that scene. It feels like an insert. Oh,
I mean, it seems to me that they wanted to, it's like, yeah, we can make it so that the ghost can take his pants off without, and like they're doing so. And I feel like it's just one of those ideas where we got to get this in, somehow. Oh,
like they have an effect on the material world somehow.
No, I'm saying like, they're like, this is a cool shot of the ghost undoing his pants. Like, we have to do this,
Yeah.
because it's just cool. Yeah. But it doesn't feel right.
Strange.
It's totally different. It's like, it feels like it's like, now it's like, what are we now? We're watching 40-Year-Old Virgin now,
Right. They're going back into like Porky's or Christmas Vacation territory. Like, we need a little more of that. I'll tell you what, I was grateful that, because Graydon and I were initially going to watch it with Helena. So I have to watch Ghostbusters. This is one thing you've never seen. This is iconographic. It's an iconic movie. You have to watch it. But I'm really glad I didn't, because he would have felt awkward, and then I don't want to have to explain, you know what I mean, what that meant, especially when I'm just trying to enjoy something. But I forgot about anything like when I think back to Ghostbusters as a whole, and of course, having only seen it once, so what do I know? It did seem like accessible. Like, this man has no dick, and the ghost blowjob scene, and some of them are relatively harmless. It's not a big deal, but they're not wholly for kids. It seemed like it was bringing in a little bit of that Caddyshack brand humor, like, or you were almost going to see, certain comedians pop up. Like, you know what I mean? Like that, you almost thought you were going to get a little more of that raunchy 80s, late 70s, 80s comedy in there. And it did sort of it almost did seem like the bean counters of the executives, like, can we get a little more, Chevy's not going to be in this now. Can we, which he initially was going to be, can we get a little more of that Chevy Chase type humor in there? Just, a couple for the dads, let's do a couple for the dads. And
I didn't know that. Was he and Bill Murray famously had beef, right? So they were going to do this movie together.
Yeah, he was initially talked about. All the guys you would initially hear in an 80s film, right?
The whole SNL
Walken.
Yeah.
All the guys you would hear about normally, all the SNL related people were at one point talked about for the cast. So it's interesting that it ended up the way it did. Like, think about if Eddie Murphy was in the movie, would have taken on, just having that one actor or that one character in there could have really given the movie a whole different look and feel. Like, those guys were forces of nature. Like, those guys could have had a huge effect on a hour and 45-minute movie. Could change the whole dynamic. So it's interesting how it ended up.
Hazen Brian Master wrote in and said, we all know and love the Ray Parker Jr. theme song, but I wanted to give a quick shout out to the Elmer Bernstein score. His music adds a layer of classic elegance to the film while at the same time incorporating some really bizarre noises that perfectly evoke spooks, specters, and or ghosts. One of the more unorthodox film soundtracks I've heard. Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out. We talked about Ray Parker, of course. Everyone knows that song, but I did say, and I wrote in my notes, and I often don't talk about the score because I don't often care, but it did stick out to me because it really, I think, set the stage for what the movie was. It felt appropriate. For some reason, it just seemed like this particular conductor or composer was able to fuse the horror trope with a lightness that let you know that you shouldn't necessarily be very scared. And it's like I said in that intro scene, which I think is just so good. The music sets the stage. When the Ghostbusters logo comes up, should you be scared or should you kind of be like eager and excited? And I think the soundtrack does a nice job of catering to the latter. Do you have anything to say about the score?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about the score. There's a lightness and a fun to it. It's jaunty. It lets you know, like, it's not threatening. It's playful. And if it crosses over into spooky, scary territory where it's ratcheting up the tension a little bit, it's doing it in a lighthearted way, which is really fun. And it feels also very 80s to me. And I have to give a shout out. Of course, the Ray Parker Jr. song. I didn't know it went to number 1 for 3 weeks. I knew it was in the top 40 somewhere, but apparently it was on Billboard's top 100 at number 1 for like 3 weeks in the United States, which is I remember, like, every time. You have to remember the 80s. A lot of you guys are too young. It was radio. It was FM, AM, cassette. Mm-hmm. That was within the car. Mostly listening to the stuff in the car before we were old enough to have our own little stereo or boom box. But even if you put in your car, backyard at the pool with the boom box, whatever, they would play the same song. If the song was hot, they would play it every hour. So this is one of those songs that would play every 7 or 8 songs for an entire summer. You know what I mean? Like, it was, I have to say though, the song is really good. The Ray Parker Jr. song is really a good song. It holds up.
It's awesome.
But for me, there was a song in this that I never realized was, I swore up and down it was a Lou Reed song until I looked it up. This song, Magic, by Mick Smiley. I have no idea who this guy is.
Me neither.
But it sounds like a Lou Reed. It sounds like Mick Smiley doing Lou Reed. But that song is really good. I love it. And I have to give a shout out to my girl, Laura Branigan. Hot Night is the song in this movie, but I challenge you guys to go look up Self-Control by Laura Branigan, one of the most underrated songs of the 80s. So shout out to Laura Branigan, not for this song in this movie, but Self-Control. Oh, and if you want to see an 80s music video, go watch the Self-Control video by Laura Branigan. That is some 80s shit, my friend.
Right on.
It's 80s all day.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Good stuff.
Let's end with this.
Yeah.
Brendan King wrote in and said, "Hello, Knockback boys. I feel like this movie is an example of what it means to be timeless. While watching it recently, I still found myself pleasantly surprised by the visuals and how well they have held up almost 40 years later. The comedy and writing also holds up really well, in my opinion, as well." You just had a allow myself to introduce myself moment. My question for you guys is, do you think this movie is timeless? Does it have the qualities that makes films timeless? I hope that made some sense. Keep up the great work and have a ghost-busting good day. I think we know the answer to this because we've kind of extensively talked about how I think it's fair to say we both think this movie is overrated, but do you still nonetheless feel like this is a timeless film? I feel like clearly they're going to keep this movie in the mind of consumers for a long period of time, but I do wonder if it's starting to wane in the sense where this new movie is maybe going to set the stage for something that is totally new. You remember you and I had a conversation not too long ago. Are they going to ever remake Star Wars? And my answer was yes.
Sure.
Eventually, it's not going to seem that crazy to do that. And,
no, I know what you mean.
And I wonder if they're going to maybe have something similar here. So I think the movie's timeless in a literal sense because obviously it is a cultural touchstone. But in my opinion, it does not earn the space that it takes in the pantheon of the 80s movies. Like, for instance, anything John Hughes did is better than this movie. Just as one example.
Okay, so, that's fair. I mean,
so
awesome.
And we don't ever hear about 16 Candles like we hear about Ghostbusters or
no, true.
So
very true.
I know they're different, but they're both. There's only so much oxygen from the 80s. Things go forward, and this is one of those things that's just taking so much space up.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point, Kyle. I mean, I think this movie is a lot of fun. I really do. I think it's very special because a large part of it is because it represents all three genres that were especially very popular then and still popular today. I think where I come in with this movie is that I find it very hard to articulate why it's so big. Not that it's big. I could kind of understand why it's big. I mean, think about one aspect. Think about the con scene, right? Think about going to a con and there's no Ghostbusters. Think about the nerd culture radar or the nerd culture periphery and Ghostbusters is nowhere to be seen. It's a different look for nerd culture. It's that big. So this movie did something right or some things right. I just find it hard to articulate exactly why it's so large, although I do think it's a lot of fun. And I do love the tech and I do love the imagery. I love the Ecto-1. I love the proton packs. I love the I love the neutrona wand. I love all of that stuff. I love the cast of characters. I love the performances. I love the setting. I love the lore that it sets up. But yeah, it's hard to put your finger on exactly why it took off like something enormous like Star Trek, like something enormous like Star Wars, like Doctor Who, like Back to the Future, like all these big nerd culture things, Superman, Batman, all this kind of stuff. I think it's an interesting thing, and I really wanted to go in and see it and examine and be able to explain exactly why. And I think I fall a little short. I think some of it is just magic in a way. Like it's just like it's almost like supernatural in a way, ironically, which is really interesting. But I was interested to see if I would even like it, and I did really, really enjoy it. Like I find it a very enjoyable hour and 45 minutes to spend your time. I could see. And you know what? Maybe all the things we talked about, like the fact of like we want to see more of the characters, flesh out the relationships, flesh out the history. Why are these guys together? Their continued adventures, whatever. Explain the tech more. Explain the world, that the supernatural world and what the rules are here. Maybe the fact that this movie doesn't put all that on the table 100%, maybe us wanting more is part of the reason why it got so big. Maybe that was a clever strategy, and maybe it was just because, where they left the tech and the explaining on the cutting room floor, it was because they were concentrating on the comedy. Who knows? Maybe that it was kind of bipolar in three different directions, horror, sci-fi, and comedy. Maybe that's why it touched on a little bit of all things, and we want more of each one of those things, So, it's a really interesting conversation. I've been wanting to do this since day one of Knockback. It was especially selfish for me because it was something that I really felt like I had only seen once and couldn't explain, and I wanted to be part of the conversation. Like I want to get it. Like let me understand this, And I do understand it to a certain degree, but at the same time, it is confounding that it got so enormous based on, think about it. Before, we had maybe a Commodore 64 game and an Atari 2600 game, and that was it, Before the other movie franchises, before the other games, before the spin-off fiction and all that kind of stuff, it was just this film, and maybe one of the single most powerful movies that come out of the 80s as far as that goes, as far as like spawning this never-ending, this immortality, really, So I think it was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys think, and especially if you guys fans out there, seeing if we did it justice.
Well, Dig, that's our conversation about 1984's Ghostbusters. It's available in many different places. I rented it on Amazon Prime, but you can find it, I think, on maybe Apple Plus or Apple TV or whatever the fuck they call it, and other places too. Dig, as we always do, we end each episode of KnockBack with a dad joke, so I throw it over to you.
Oh, thank you, my friend. I just lost my dad joke, and I forgot to write it down. Am I going to have to read another one? Hold on, give me 1 second. I'm going to find it. Hold on. Oh, here it is. Kyle. Mountains aren't just funny. They're hilarious.
That's a good one.
Aren't you glad I went and searched for that one?
Thank you. I'm glad we took a few moments.
Kyle.
Yeah.
We came. We saw. We kicked its ass.
Yeah, we did. We'll get to Ghostbusters 2 at some point, I'm sure, as well. We'll have to see that. I have no touchstone with that movie at all.
I meant to watch the trailer for it because I totally forgot. So I have no recollection of that movie. That's going to be a fresh conversation because I have no remembrance.
It is going to be fresh. All right, my friend. It's good to see you, and it's good to see all of you out there. Thank you so much for your love, kindness, and support of all things Last Stand and KnockBack. Remember, of course, you can listen to Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, Defining Duke, and Xbox podcast as well. All supported on Patreon at the biggest nerd culture Patreon in history, patreon.com/laststandmedia. Thank you so much for your love, kindness, and support over there as well. Merch, laststandmedia.shop. Follow us on social media. Follow us on YouTube. Call your mother. She probably misses you. We'll talk to you later. Goodbye.
Call our mother.
Call our mother. She misses us. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Ivan Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.